Hi, this is Tom for twoproducer.com. This week we're talking with Godfrey Townsend. Godfrey Townsend is a great guitar player who's got some really wonderful things to share with us this week. Put things in perspective. Your earliest days in music were?
Earliest days in music, very early days, or the beginning of it was my parents were opera singers.
Oh.
In a sense. My mother sang opera. She sang in the chorus in the opera. Her older brothers were tenors and sang in the opera. She sang in the chorus. She took piano lessons as a young girl. And this is once on the island of Malta in the Mediterranean Sea, a nice little island. And
you're Maltese?
Yeah, my mom was Maltese.
Oh, your mom?
Yeah. My dad was born in England. He was raised in Ireland. His family worked with racehorses and stuff, so they were constantly going back and forth between England and Ireland. And he was raised in Ireland, but wanted to be a tenor, an Irish tenor, or whatever you want to call it.
That's an Irish tenor. Yeah.
Operatic tenor. So he moved to New York in the 50s to try to further his career, you know. So I grew up in a household where there was opera and classical music and piano playing and whatever, you know.
What music did you find yourself most interested in during that period of time?
Well, I mean, in the early days, obviously, we were listening to what was known as AM radio back then.
Oh, I remember it very well.
And, you know, with your little transistor, you know, walking around with your 6-transistor radio or whatever it was, hearing all those 60s pop hits, American 60s pop hits, yeah. So that's what I started out listening to, and then eventually started getting, you know, of course the Beatles came along, and that opened up a whole nother
It confused everybody.
And then you start listening to FM radio. In New York was WNEW, FM was 102.7, and you had Scott Muni and Allison Steele, the Nightbird, and all that stuff going on. So then you got turned on to, you know, all the other stuff. So from the Beatles, it kind of, you had the Who, Led Zeppelin, Cream, Hendrix, you know, Mountain, you know, King Crimson, all this kind of stuff that started coming in. So eventually got into that.
So you were listening close by your AM, FM radio to top 40 essentially in the beginning, and then that NEW transition. Which I think that was me too. Yeah. Pretty much so. Oh, absolutely. A lot of us started playing music then, but I think your interest was really going towards this British blues kind of invasion with Beck and Page and Clapton and maybe Peter Green, folks like that.
Yeah, like I said, you know, when the Beatles landed, that was all anybody thought
Magic.
About. Yeah. And I can even remember my dad, you know, when they were landing at the airport, it was all on TV, and my dad calling me from my room, hey, you might want to come see this.
Oh, that's funny.
And
I think my parents were running in the other direction.
Yeah, but he, for some reason or other, he figured I might be interested in seeing that, and I didn't really know who they were. I was young, eight years old or whatever, right? You know, but then, like I said, eventually, when going from listening to that pop music and that top 40 stuff that was on AM radio, then you started listening to the Who. You know, the rock opera Tommy came out. And I guess we were probably visiting relatives in Europe one summer, and I saw that record in a record store and noticed that, hey, this guy's got the same last name as me. There's a reason to go buy it, or whatever it was, you know. And I was turned on to the Who, and playing with kids in school, other guys in my age bracket, in my grade, who played a little bit as well, and you put a little band together, and you're messing around in each other's basements or whatever, doing stuff, and, you know, learning stuff from Tommy.
And lo and behold, you make this this music adapt. You adapt yourself to this music initially in the beginning.
Yeah. And then it's like, oh, Led Zeppelin, you know, Jimi Hendrix, you know. You know, the local record store was on the main avenue where I lived in Ridgewood, on Myrtle Avenue. Action Records was the name of the place, and you just go by and you see all these album covers in the window, and somehow or other you're attracted to them. You know, the looks of the album covers or the guys that are on the album covers. You look and go, this guy's cool looking. Who's he? You know.
Put that in perspective with Amazon today.
Everything is oversaturated. I mean, back then it was like, you know, little things that you were happy to have. Just that, you know. My dad was always into browsing for records in Manhattan.
Sure.
He'd go browsing for opera records and different tenors that he was into. You know, he was very into doing his research on all the different.
Do you remember the Colony?
Singers. Yeah, of course. Yeah,
was
Colony
that the
huge.
best?
That was right up from 48th Street, one block over, right?
Exactly, right
On
by the
that
Brill
corner.
Building.
And you can get all the posters. They had all the posters outside on the storefront.
Right by the Brill Building, and the Brill Building was the
Colony
epicenter
Records.
for writing.
Yeah,
Musicians
exactly.
that were writing.
Yeah, I worked with a doo-wop guy who grew up in the Brill Building. A guy named Kenny Vance.
Oh, Kenny Vance.
Yeah,
I know the name.
Yeah.
What do you think your earliest success was?
Earliest.
You know, that
success.
really made you transition from being this garage kid or a basement kid, and your playing was like moving yourself away from that.
You know, at an early age, I had my own original band, and I would play at a place called the Coventry. It was on Queens Boulevard in Queens, and it was advertised in the Village Voice, right near, you know, and it was known as the, you know, the Queens over the river version of Max's Kansas City, and where everybody who hangs out at Max's comes to Queens, they go there. And it was where Kiss got their start, and the New York Dolls played there a lot, and Billy Squire's band Piper, Binky Phillips's band The Planets, they all played at the Coventry. It was an original club. When I got out of high school in 1974, I started working that fall with an original band, writing music, and where are we going to do? Oh, we have to go to audition at Coventry on a Thursday night and try to get a gig there. And we wound up becoming one of the headliners at Coventry.
How cool is that?
In 1975, and Gene Simmons saw us, you know, and I had a conversation with him after our gig. He wanted to know who's the leader of the band. I want to speak to, and I wound up having a conversation with Gene Simmons at 17 years old, you know, about him helping us get a record deal or some whatever.
And?
Well, the thing is, he was attracted to the band because we sounded very British. We were listening to.
Oh, okay, yeah.
We were listening to all this stuff. He was in his, I guess, record scout, talent scout phase, which is what he did at one point, just going around and seeing bands and discovering people. You know, he even brought Van Halen to audition for his manager, Bill O'Coin.
Oh, is that so?
At one point. And he brought them from California to audition for Bill O'Coin from his management company. And Bill O'Coin said, I don't see any commercial potential here. Send them back.
A real futurist.
So Gene liked my band, and he kind of made the point to tell me, well, you know, a lot of bands like the Beatles and Led Zeppelin are all kind of like phasing out, breaking up. So there's a void there. There's a void. And I think you guys have a kind of a British sound to you, you know. We were writing what we would consider intricate rock, is what we called ourselves.
Intricate rock.
Yeah, I know. A little more than just, you know, 3-chord rock and roll stuff, you know. So yeah, we had influences from a lot of the British stuff. So
Talking about influences, what kind of influence did guys like Beck, Clapton, and of course Page have on your own playing style?
Obviously a lot, because at one point you're trying to learn how to play better lead guitar. And I went for piano lessons as a kid, but when I went to take guitar lessons, it wasn't my thing. I didn't like it because it wasn't what I wanted to learn. So I wound up just listening to the radio and getting a fake book from my friend, a guy who I was in a band with. His dad was in a wedding band. He used to get these fake books, which were basically just books with all sheet music, you know, copied and put into this one book that you could buy for like $5, like with 100 songs in it, you know, and all the chord charts were there. The little chord diagrams where it shows you what chords they're playing. Listening to the radio, following these little sheet music things in the fake book, and that's how I learned how to play. But my ear was also pretty open to listening to what the lead guitar players were doing as well. So besides learning to play rhythm guitar, I was able to grasp the melodies that were happening, even on simple Beatles stuff that was more just like melodic lines as far as, you know.
Well, I've seen you with your acoustic guitar many times doing old tune, you know, Beatle tunes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
At what was the name of that place on Ocean Avenue in Malvern?
At Jimmy Cano's place, Cano's Tavern,
exactly.
Cano's Swiss Tavern.
Yes.
Yeah.
You used to play there pretty regularly.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah, we played there a lot. Jimmy was a good he was a good supporter of live music.
Absolutely.
I brought people there when I played at Westbury with Alan Parsons and Jack Bruce and Mark Farner. We went over there and jammed afterwards.
I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember that, as a matter of fact.
Yeah. But, you know, the influence was wanting to learn how to play lead guitar and then getting turned on to an album like Live Cream, where there's 12-minute version of I'm So Glad or something, and Clapton is just playing, you know, it's basically a half dozen riffs that he
reworked in different octaves.
Played all kinds of different ways, cut them in half, double time, half time them, you know, chop them up. But it was basically like, to me, it was like learning a language of each guy. Each guy speaks a different language.
Sure. Same notes, different nuances.
So when you learn Italian or something, you learn you have a phrase book. You learn words. This is how you say door. This is how you say cat, dog. And then you learn, is there a bathroom? You know, you learn different sentences, different phrases, and then you learn the language. And so that's the way I learned how to play like each one of those guys, by learning all their different licks, you know. So.
And between that time and the time you started touring, I know the Happy Together tour is something that you've been on for about 10 years now.
This is our 10th year now.
What are the bands? I'm sorry.
Okay, well, you know, we swap them around every year. We change it up and whatever. You know, we started out with like Mickey Dolenz from the Monkees and Mark Lindsay from Paul Revere and the Raiders, the Buckinghams, the Grassroots, the Turtles, the Cowsills, the Association, Gary Puckett, Chuck Negron from Three Dog Night. We even had Mark Farner on one year. He was more a 70s artist, and we did use him on Hippie Fest tour, which was before Happy Together. We had Hippie Fest, which was more like 70s acts, Rick Derringer and Gary Wright and stuff like that, you know, Dave Mason and stuff like that we used on them. So the Happy Together is more of a 60s pop stuff. A lot of rhythm guitar playing, not much lead guitar playing going on that, but concentrating on vocals and stuff like that.
The music,
you
making
know,
the music happen.
It's still great music, and you know, stuff like Gary Puckett and the Union Gap, those chord progressions of those songs were classic.
Yeah.
You know, when I'm playing that stuff, I'm like, wow. I remember just being so moved by this as a kid, listening to it, you know, at Rockaway's Playland. You're on a ride, and this music is playing. Sure. You know, and that's how far back I go with that stuff.
You're currently you're currently in rehearsals for a Clapton show at the Space.
Yeah.
And that's happening
Friday, May 24th. It'll be over, probably.
It will be.
When this is seen. But
well,
anyway,
let's talk about you know, your Clapton's experience. I mean, I've been watching the advertising for Clapton type shows for years.
He's probably my main influence. Out of the three guys who I would consider the Holy Trinity,
there you go,
Beck, Page, and Clapton. Clapton is probably the most, and this is not in a negative way, but he's probably the simplest.
Yeah, I can see that.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
He's the one I think that stuck closer to the pure blues influences, whereas Page kind of took it somewhere different. Beck, of course, took it way different. So the three of them have their different ways of translating what they learned from listening to blues in the early days. Clapton stuck with the mainstream style.
And Clapton is really the only singer out of those three.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And he's a great singer.
For sure.
Well, and I don't think he discovered
start out that way.
I think he discovered his voice just around
Yeah.
when Cream was getting ready to go bye-bye.
Yeah. Because even with Cream, they were kind of trying to push Cream as him being the guy. But Jack Bruce was really the guy.
And he was doing all the writing.
He was doing all the writing. He was doing all the singing. But they wanted like that pretty boy guitar player guy, as the main focus. It wound up happening later on anyway, just as a result of Clapton just continuing to want to write songs and sing. And his voice from the very beginning, I mean, maybe the first time you heard him sing was in
Sunshine of Your Love.
I'm
even
so
glad.
Before that, Blues Breakers, he sang
Okay.
Ramblin' on My Mind on the Blues Breakers album. With this very meek, timid, frail kind of voice, trying to sound like a blues guy,
Yeah.
And then in Cream, then he sang one line in Sunshine of Your Love. And then Strange Brew and Badge and things like that. But his voice didn't really start taking off until really Derek and the Dominoes and his solo album and whatever, Blind Faith. Steve Winwood sang all that stuff pretty much. But yeah, he's become quite a singer now, and to be able to get on stage and sing and play all this authentic blues stuff.
I'm sure you've received a lot of offers to work on other projects, but I know recently you've had some really great activity with, oddly enough, three of your idols, if you will, who were all in the same band, and that band is?
The Yardbirds.
There you go.
Pretty amazing. I mean, when I first got that call, I was on tour with the Happy Together tour. On tour. I'm the first one up on the tour bus, 7 o'clock in the morning, whatever it is, and making coffee. And I'm just having my first sip of coffee, and my phone rings, and I see it's from an agency, a booking agency that I used to use for some other things. Hello. And the woman who was running the agency, told me that Jim McCarty, who's still the original drummer, he's still in the band with the Yardbirds, wants to replace the guitar player, and they want another guitar player. And every time he would approach her about this, she kept thinking of me. She had booked something else I was working with back in 2012, 2013, a thing called Sons of Cream. I was working with Ginger Baker's son and Jack Bruce's son, and we had a thing called Sons of Cream. And she booked that. So she knew what I can do, Clapton-wise, I guess, or whatever, and she knows my abilities through the Happy Together tour. She books a lot of the bands that are on the Happy Together tour. So she knew I was a responsible guy, and I knew my way around things, and that my influences were that kind of stuff.
And that the catalog was probably mostly in your brain.
Oh, you know what? It's funny about that is that somehow or other I skipped over the Yardbirds as a band.
Okay.
In the early '60s, right? When did they come out? It was around that same time. Mid '60s, and then they when Page was in the band, it was a later '67, '68, and then that became Led Zeppelin, or he made that into Led Zeppelin, or whatever. And Led Zeppelin toured as the new Yardbirds when they first started booking dates as the new Yardbirds.
Interesting.
And so I kind of skipped over that somehow. My only real exposure to the Yardbirds catalog or their repertoire was For Your Love,
The hits.
Which I don't even remember hearing that on AM radio as a kid.
Were you listening to AM radio? By that time, you were probably already into NEW.
Yeah, by that time, I was probably, doing that. And, you know, so to know that Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page, and Eric Clapton all came out of that band, yeah, that was stuff I learned later on by listening to later on stuff. I listened to Cream. I discovered Eric Clapton. I actually discovered Led Zeppelin first. And then someone else went, oh, you like Led Zeppelin? You like Jimmy Page? You should hear this guy, Eric Clapton. Oh, okay. Listen to Cream. Then I'm listening to Cream, and someone else goes, oh, you like Jimmy Page and Eric Clapton? You should hear Jeff Beck. And then I'm listening to Jeff Beck.
Truth.
Like the Jeff Beck group.
Truth.
Yeah. And so somehow or other I skipped over the Yardbirds, but I got into everything that they did afterwards.
Sure.
So when I got the gig, when I was offered the gig and took the gig, I had 20 songs I had to learn. I mean,
I got you.
Yeah, you know, there are things like Train Kept a Rollin' and Dazed and Confused that I kind of knew already. But and For Your Love, I probably faked my way through that a couple of times as well. I Ain't Got You was one that I had heard on the History of Eric Clapton. Remember that double album, History of Eric Clapton? So it went through his whole career, and I Ain't Got You was one of the Yardbirds tunes that was on that album, and I knew that from that. But otherwise, I had to go back and go, what's Smokestack Lightning?
Great tune.
And I put on the record the 5 Live Yardbirds, and I go, oh, I see, it's this blues lick. Oh, so just blues lick for 10 minutes. Just play that blues lick.
Exactly.
Of course, it all has to be developed and sound like a band. So I studied. I knew of all 3 of their styles. So there's different eras where the material goes from the Clapton era, then it goes to the Beck era, you know, Page era. Page was the last guy. So all I did was apply my knowledge of their styles to the different songs.
And probably modernized it a little bit.
Throw in a little bit of what, you know, a live energy thing.
Real vibrato as opposed to shaking vibrato, right? I mean, really, seriously, that was
really
like
the truth.
That was a big thing then.
Because the thing is, and again, not in a negative sense, but when they were all playing within that context of that band at that period of time, they weren't as good as they are now, or they weren't as good as they were in Led Zeppelin, and on Blow
6
by
months
Blow,
later, 2 years later.
Yeah,
you know, they were always evolving.
They were developing their styles,
absolutely,
and experimenting with new things as well. So, you know, Page was a session guitarist, and when they asked him to join the band after Clapton left, he went, "I'm making 3 times more money doing sessions. So thanks, but no thanks. But I have a buddy, his name is Jeff Beck, he might be interested." And he goes in the band. And then at some point, I guess Page got fed up with the whole session stuff. And then he wanted to join the band. Jim McCarty, I heard him saying it in a phone interview he was doing in the van while we were touring. He said, yeah, then, you know, Jimmy Page, he was so keen to join the band at one point that he even wanted to come in and play bass because our bass player was leaving. He was willing to just play bass.
Well, it's a good spot. You're up on stage and it's great music.
And we brought Jimmy Page in on bass. Jeff Beck was on lead guitar. Chris Drea on rhythm guitar. And it didn't make sense. After a few gigs, we realized it didn't make sense to have Jimmy on bass and Chris Drea playing guitar. We swapped them around. So Chris Drea went on bass, and Jimmy and Jeff were playing dueling guitars.
That's when it used to be easy to play bass.
I guess so.
It was a lot easier.
Much to do.
Exactly.
Right.
So now you've become saturated with Yardbirds music, and you're ready to start rehearsing with them. And maybe even
2 days rehearsal.
2 days. So you learned those songs really well.
Yeah, well, I had a few months, you know. The tour was postponed. It was meant to happen in November of last year. And then we moved it up to March of this year. So I had a few more months. And, you know, there was other things I was doing, work on my house.
Looking for a new house up in Woodstock.
Looking for a new house up in Woodstock. You know, things going on. The holidays, obviously. So I kind of made a schedule for myself. All right, after the holidays, I'll start wood shedding the Yardbirds material, you know.
From Woodstock to Woodshed.
Yeah. So I just, you know, 20 songs. All right, I'll work on the stuff that I know already, in a sense that I've heard the songs already. Start stuff like Heart Full of Soul, Train Kept a Rolling, Over, Under, Sideways, Down. And then I discovered these new songs that I never heard, like Evil Hearted You. What a great song. It's just like such a great, almost something that Tim Burton might use for one of his movie soundtracks or something, you know. And it just has this great twangy kind of guitar, and then Jeff Beck plays this great slide solo, like eerie sounding.
Those are some pretty big shoes to fill, those three guys.
What's great is that because of my reputation amongst other players and friends and fan base and all that kind of stuff, everyone was like so supportive. They were like, "You got this. This is right up your alley."
Absolutely.
The perfect guy for the gig. Perfect gig for you. You're going to have a blast. You're going to blow them away, you know. And, you know, at first it was a little shaky because, you know, the band was already in place and they kind of are used to what they're used to hearing.
Listening to the notes.
And now there's a new guy there doing something different. I had to get used to the band, and the band had to get used to me.
Sure.
And I just said, you know what, this music is great, and I can learn so many songs note for note right off the record.
Sure.
But you've got your live versions of the way you do things with extended jams and rave-ups and improvisational things, and that's going to take a while for us to feel like a band.
To get comfortable.
And it's went exactly the way I thought it was going to go.
2 days rehearsal.
Yeah, two days rehearsal. Go out and do some shows. Maybe show number 4, 5, 6. Now we're starting to feel like a band and sound like a band. And by the end of that tour, the last 3 shows were just killer. You know, we did a cruise ship thing. The Flower Power Cruise, we jumped on the second half of it, flew to San Juan, Puerto Rico, jumped on the second half of it, and did 2 shows on that cruise. They were the best shows because we were relaxed. We kind of had those 12 prior shows under our belt, and we could just get up there and have fun.
You were a band.
And it was amazing. And Jim was so happy, which was great. You know, Jim McCarty, the original drummer, he was so happy with it that he was asking the tour manager, the road manager, the manager, is he really not available all summer? Is he really not available all summer?
How good is that?
You know, yeah.
They liked you.
Yeah. So we've got stuff going on for the fall. They want to pick it right up. As soon as I'm done with the summer tour, they want to pick it right up and do some local dates in the U.S., and then we're going to do some England and Germany, I think, in November, you know, so.
So you're going to be touring internationally as well with this thing?
Yeah.
How cool is that?
And maybe even do some recording.
Well,
yeah,
that's amazing. I mean, you obviously spend a lot of time on the road.
Yeah, I mean, I started in '95 really touring across the country with John Entwistle of The Who.
Yes.
You know.
We didn't touch on your relationship with John Entwistle.
Yeah. It was a good one. It was a good one, and there was another band that I grew up listening to. And so when they threw us on stage together at the China Club in 1994 or whatever, he showed up after a guest appearance at Daltrey Sings Townsend show at Carnegie Hall.
Daltrey Sings Townsend.
He comes over to China Club and gets up with me, and we do 2 hours of Who material, impromptu. Eddie Vedder got up and sang a few tunes, and whoever else was there, you know, Rabbit maybe, keyboard player, you know, and we just did 2 hours worth of Who stuff. And a year later, I get a call that says he wants you in his band.
How nice is that? And that was that was probably your first major thing?
Yeah. I mean, I was doing a thing out in Laughlin when I got that call, and it was sort of like a package show that was going on at the Flamingo Hilton Casino with members of Beatlemania, original Beatlemania guys, Mitch Weissman and Dave Leon, and we were backing up Joey Mullins from Badfinger, Spencer Davis, Mitch Ryder, Tiny Tim, like these kind of,
Yes.
60s kind of pop acts or whatever. It was called Jukebox Giants, the show. Merrily Rush, who sang Angel of the Morning, the guy from the Beau Brummels, all these different acts. That was 3 months long, that gig. And we would just swap out acts, and every, 6 nights a week, 2 shows a night.
That sounds like a pretty heavy gig.
So that was probably my first real major job, or whatever. And while I was on that is when I got the call to do Entwistle.
That contractor must have loved you because you could cover all that stuff.
Yeah. They brought me out there just on faith. Like, we know you can do this. And I went,
I can do this.
Yeah, I can do this. Another one with like a couple of days rehearsal, and then boom, you're on. Yeah.
So I guess this Yardbirds thing for you is a wonderful compliment to your abilities.
Yeah, I mean, it seems that if it's at the tail end, or if it is the tail end of my career, I don't know. But after touring for now, what is it, 25 years?
A long time.
To come full circle to this gig is almost like the icing on the cake.
Yeah, but you're a young guy. You've got plenty more.
Oh, I'm hoping another 10 years, maybe.
There you go. When you get to my age, you can
touring.
start complaining.
Well, the guys I'm working with now on Happy Together are all in their mid and late 70s.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
I mean, yeah, the Turtles guys, they're early 70s. Then there's got the mid 70s people, and then you've got some late 70s people that were on this tour. And I'm going, well, I mean, if they can do it, I can do it,
You can certainly do it. I've seen you. Are you doing any singing on the Yardbirds thing? Background singing and anything?
Some backgrounds. Yeah, some backgrounds. Because there's a guy, he's been with Jim now for many years. He's been with them for a long time. A guy named John Iden, who's been singing and playing guitar.
Mm-hmm.
So he does a very good job on the vocals, and I just jump in here and there for a harmony part or to double something.
Yeah.
And then there's another guy who plays percussion and harmonica. Harmonica is a very important part of the Yardbird sound. So he also sings backups and doubles a lot of things with the lead singer,
So it sounds like you're really comfortable with this environment.
Yeah. Kenny Aronson on bass guitar, amazing bass player who I've been listening to him since his days with, Stories and Rick Derringer's band and stuff like that.
Oh, he was also with Rick Derringer. Interesting.
Yeah.
That's a divergence.
He's played with everybody. Kenny's played with everybody.
Yeah, I've heard his name a lot.
Yeah.
I have heard his name a lot. Well, I think that we've got you covered. I think that this is, a really great interview.
Thank you.
Nice to hear all of these things that you're doing.
Yeah.
And just as an aside, I mean, you play a million different guitars. Are you endorsing anything?
I don't know about a million.
you got at least 10.
Endorsing, I sort of have these kind of like gentleman's agreement kind of endorsements with some companies. Gibson has been there for me since probably, I want to say 2001. Paul Reed Smith, they got involved very early on when I started playing with John Entwistle in 1995. I was using exclusively Paul Reed Smith.
I remember that because it was only you and me on Long Island.
That's right.
Well, that's not true.
And I mean, I'm a purist in a sense that I like original guitars for things. You know, I like to go with, if I'm doing a certain gig, it's almost like you're studying the part like an actor. So you learn, like, say, if an actor has to play someone in a movie, he does research on the guy's life.
Sure.
So when I got the Yardbirds gig, I went, okay, let's see what they used. All right, Jimmy Page, you know, he used a Fender Telecaster. Jeff Beck used a Fender Telecaster. Eric Clapton, when he was first in the band, it was a Fiesta Red Telecaster that was owned by the manager. It was kind of like just whoever's in the band gets to use that guitar. And so the Telecaster was the main guitar of that gig. You know, later on, Jeff Beck used a Les Paul, you know, in the band. But so I studied. Okay, so I like to have a visual that goes with the whole thing. If you're playing a song that has a Stratocaster on the original recording, Stevie Ray Vaughan or whatever it is, you want to play a Stratocaster.
Absolutely.
You know, there are other guitars that can get that sound or something like it, but for the authenticity of the visual, even the vibe, holding the Strat in your hand and you're trying to create the sound.
And Telecaster has made a huge resurgence recently.
Yeah, yeah. People are digging them. Yeah.
I don't even know how that happened.
It was really the first electric guitar, wasn't it, really? I mean, it was really,
54.
when you really want to think about it, that was really the first real electric guitar.
50, was that 53 or 54 or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah, right around then.
Got to ask Dave Davidson this question.
The Broadcaster or Esquire, whatever you want to call it.
Esquire, I think it was called.
You know, the very first ones, the single pickup guitar, and that was the really start of it. That and the Strat, and then the Les Paul with Gibson and the SG. So when I play a Clapton song that has an SG or a Les Paul sound, you want to play that guitar to play it. So do I have an endorsement? Sorry to say, there's not one company that I can go, yeah, such.
And that's good, because you're remaining true to yourself.
You know, when you have a technician come to your house to do a job, he brings his tools. So it's different tool for each different thing that needs to be done. So that's kind of how I look at guitars, like that as well, you know. So
an amplifier is just a whole nother conversation.
The other night I was playing a cover gig, and I was they throw Pinball Wizard into the set. And that's a song I hate to play on electric guitar.
Sure, it's an acoustic guitar song.
Because I want to just be playing a big J200 for that or whatever, you know. So, you know, playing it on an electric guitar, it's like the tone is not right, the intonation, you're standing up and you're playing these, you know, bar chords, and it just doesn't sound the same as the record.
Yeah, it's not the same feel.
Yeah, but, you know, we soldier on.
Well, you've been soldiering on for a long time, Godfrey. I'm really happy you're doing this TuneProducer.com interview show. And thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you
so much
for
having
traveling
me.
all the way out from Queens.
Yeah. It took me at least an hour to get here.
But it was worth it. Thanks again, Godfrey. I look forward to seeing you this summer on your Happy Together tour, as well as in the fall on the Yardbirds tour. Thanks again for stopping in with us. This is Tom from TuneProducer.com, bringing you the best of the local musicians in New York, the stars behind the stars. Please like us on Facebook and subscribe to TuneProducer.com on YouTube. And while you're at it, thanks for watching this interview.